All right, and it's kind of an interesting number 60, PPM60. 300 plus to go, but 60 is not a bad number. Roughly is the equivalent of 2 months. In fact, today is the 13th of April, so depending on how you count months, it is the end of the second month of these. Started commemorating the 10th anniversary of this writing project, which happened between 2004 and 2005. Started that 2 months ago on February the 13th, and been going strong for the last 2 months, and have recorded in various locations. Summit, New Jersey, where it all started, which happens to be in the house that I grew up in, so it's kind of interesting. Not planned, it just worked out that way. Recorded in Philadelphia 2 weeks ago at the University of Pennsylvania. My friend Troy Richardson's Comparative Indigeneities in Research Theory and Schooling, the 2014 Indigenous Education Pre-Conference. Recorded it in Chicago at the meeting of the Society for the Philosophical Study of Education, which was happening at the American Philosophical Association meeting. And of course, I recorded in Albuquerque, New Mexico, at the annual meeting of the Philosophy of Education Society. And in between, recorded a bunch here in my home in Portland, Maine, as well as some in my office at Hofstra University in Hempstead. So it's part of the sort of feeling of this work that it's happening in various locations, various times, but at least once a day. And so part of one of the main themes of this piece is this notion of wandering, thinking as wandering, and moving from one location to another, and dwelling there, and taking up the question of being and learning. The question has taken us through a very close reading, somewhat circular reading, and that's by design, of Plato's Allegory of the Cave. And where we left off, I've been ruminating and exploring the question concerning the truth of concealment, which is one half of what I call the twofold play. The twofold play is the play of being and its disclosure to us, and the disclosure of being to us as the truth of concealment and the truth of disclosure. And if disclosure is a offering of freedom, and then if a taking of that offering is an enactment of freedom, and if we follow Arendt and it's a showing of ourselves, then that has to arise from somewhere. And so its arrival happens from the darkness, if you will, or the roots, the below, that we call the truth of concealment. And so I've been talking about, I've been reading the meditations that deal with the truth of concealment. And yesterday's meditation talked about the figures in the cave of the allegory, because we're still in chapter 4, roughly pages 95, 96, thereabouts, of Being and Learning, which was the book that was published subsequently after this writing project was completed. But about 7 years after the fact it came out, so it just goes to show you the life of this piece. And talking about the allegory of the cave, and talking about the figures in the allegory that represent a kind of educators that are holding back and in a certain sense preparing the emergence of that freedom. Drawing on Arendt, the key quote from yesterday was to think of those who are orchestrating those teachers as sophists, because, quoting Arendt, who's quoting Plato from the dialogue of the sophist, 254a through b, 254 lines, 254a through b, he writes that the sophist is the one who is at home in the darkness of not being. So in a way, we're returning to a question that I was a motivating and moving question in the beginning, very beginning. How is it with the nothing? So the very first meditations, if you go back and check those out, the question that's evoking the first moments is the question, Heidegger's question, how is it with the nothing? And if we link that with this notion of the darkness of not being, there is definitely a circle that is being made, where the dwelling of the sophist is the one of not being, and so in a certain sense Heidegger's question, how is it with the nothing, is a question that is in some respects the question of how is it to dwell in the truth of concealment. And the truth of concealment we've been talking about as one of holding back in preparation for freedom, for learning itself. So education, in an interesting way, the way that I'm phrasing it, education is a preparation for learning. So continuing on. Our brief sketch of the sophist has indicated a way of understanding the originary appearance of the truth of concealment as a preparatory schooling in oratory, the art of communication, hearing, and speaking. We must reiterate that our retelling of the allegory is attempting to highlight the sense in which each part of the story, each stage, offers us an account of the twofold play, the relation between the truth of concealment and the truth of appearance. The relation we have indicated identifies the processual unfolding of being and in turn the process of learning. So when Heidegger says Plato's assertion is clear, the allegory of the cave illustrates the essence of education, and further that according to his reading, Heidegger, quote, the allegory not only illustrates the essence of education, but at the same time opens our eyes to a transformation in the essence of truth, unquote. He is drawing our attention to the way the story reveals education, paideia, as a process of turning, the turning around of the whole human being, which is made possible by the character of the truth as a transformative process itself. The relation between education and truth, revealed in Heidegger's reading of the story, is analogous to the relation between learning and being that we are identifying. In both cases, the twofold play of concealment and appearance identifies truth / being as a dynamic processual unfolding that offers the condition for the possibility of education / learning as paideia, the constant turning around of the whole human being. To be turned around is to be called out, held out, reposed, put underway. The important point here is that at each stage or turning point in the story, there is a depiction of the twofold play. In turn, we must reconcile the developmental structure of the allegory with the constancy of the twofold play that enables this development. We must think these opposites of always already and not yet that attain within the relation between education, learning, truth, being. Put differently, we must reconcile the development that the story identifies as the essence of education with the force that moves this development and is thereby present at each and every stage. To think learning and being together is to identify the relation between the two, a relation we have been exploring throughout. The challenge to think the meaning of the unity of the always already, not yet, takes us back into the cave, back to the first part of the story. If the relation between education, learning, and truth, being, persists throughout the story, then the contrast we have been highlighting between the security of the domestic habitat and the unstable ground of the open region receives a challenge. The challenge asks us to account for this persistence of this relationship within a location that has been declared an abode devoid of learning. The declaration was implicit but clear and motivated us to take up the allegory as an exemplary tale of the movement from the location of non-learning to the region of learning. Thus, to identify the relation between learning and being within the cave appears to produce a tension with the claim that learning only gets underway when the apprentice has been drawn out into the open region of the sage. In fact, this emergence of this tension allows for us to explore further the preparatory character of the cave. The cave as the domestic habitat, the habitat of domestic security, prepares the way for the emergence of the appearance by habituating the truth of concealment. The cave offers the most secure shelter for concealment, and as the home of hiding, makes possible in the most profound way the appearance of appearance, the releasement of the apprentice, the learner. The more sheltered, the more one is prepared to emerge as apprentice. But how does the apprentice appear in the cave? How does the not yet emerge in the cave? How can we account for the other side of the twofold play? And that's how it ends. So, in some of my post-reading commentary, I've been talking about the experience of being in the cave and living under the truth of concealment as education. So education as holding back, the holding back of learning, the holding back of freedom. But this is commentary. And so you see, when I pick up the piece that I've written for today, I'm going back to a citation that has appeared before, so it's one of these stones that gets dropped again. It's from Heidegger, who says the allegory of the cave illustrates the essence of education, and that the allegory not only illustrates the essence of education, but at the same time opens our eyes to the transformation, the essence of truth. So for Heidegger, education is the paideia, it's the churning that's going on. And I've been suggesting that that churning is actually learning. Right? So what I've been calling the truth of concealment actually is only happening in the time before the turnings begin. So I'm departing here from Heidegger, who talks about education as paideia. So for me, that's one sort of distinction I've been making here. And yet, in the writing, that's not the case. Right? So in this particular meditation, it's important, I have to note this, say that I link Heidegger's talk of the allegory as pointing to both the essence of education, but also the essence of truth, and linking those two. And he says the transformation. So what he's hinting at seems to be our encounter with the truth of being as presencing, as the dynamic truth. So that the encounter with truth is encountered in the turnings of paideia. But I've been calling that learning. Here, though, I'm saying that what Heidegger's calling here in this writing, I'd call education as a side of learning, but really as a way of talking about learning. And then to talk about truth, again, in light of Heidegger's point, as backslash or related to being. So whenever there's a backslash, it's kind of like almost like a fraction, where there's these two sides. Being is the denominator. So the truth would be something like a part of being, and education is a part of learning. So that works then, because being, as it discloses to us, is disclosed both as truth, but also as non-truth. That is to say, as reality and not reality, or what is and what is not, and what is not yet. So there's this almost trinity of fundamental disclosures of being. The is not yet. And I guess you could add the fourth, is no longer. so that's sort of like a grammatical tenses, where you have the past, the present, and the present future. So that's in a certain way a trinity, but you also have to account for the is not all along the way. So the real fundamental is, of course, the is and is not, and I'm not going to get into a digression on Parmenides and talking about the truth or the isness of the is not, which he says you can't think that, he says. So truth is in the way that it's been talked about here is as presencing is one part of being, but being is also absencing. So there's the absencing of being, and that gets disclosed to us, which is not part of the truth, because truth is presencing. That's my, the facticity of things that are appearing to us. And then there's all that is, but is not appearing to us, right? So that you can just think of it in terms of, like, here I am, I'm in Portland, I'm recording this video, and you, whomever you are, who might be listening or watching and listening to this, are not present to me, but yet you are. So I'm presuming that you're a human being, let's just say, that's existing on this day, April the 13th, 2014, and somewhere on this world you are existing, doing something. But at some point, you're present to me insofar as I am assuming your existence. And I'm not even thinking of all the friends and family and acquaintances and people I've gotten to know, not to mention those who I know exist, but I don't know them personally. I'm thinking of the one who is possibly going to, at some point, watch this video. So your existence, in relationship specifically to me on this video, is absent. But at some point, and in the time that you would be listening to this, you would be present in relationship to this video. So you are in relationship insofar as there's a future time in which you will be listening to this. But at the current time, when I'm recording this, and this isn't streaming live, this is just being captured as a documentary piece to then be and it will then be uploaded. And at the time that I'm recording it, you're not present. You're absent. So there's the truth of your being absent, the reality of your absence. So I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. So so all that to say that I'm trying to get at the truth of appearance and the truth of concealment, and where I end is to talk about, well, in what sense are things appearing? Now, my feeling is that there's going to be a sort of a move that's made where I'll talk of, I'm not looking ahead because that's if I want to capture the phenomenological and have it improvisational and sort of real in my response to it, I won't look ahead, but I imagine that where I'm going to go with this is to talk about, the moment after the first turning, as being where the first appearance happens. But perhaps I won't. But I kind of enjoyed talking about the different parts of being, and talking about the truth as presencing as one of those, and talking a little bit about the existence of the absence of you who are watching this video. So I hope that that's something that would cause you to think a bit, and to, if you haven't watched other videos, maybe you watch them now and go back and at some point it would be great if someone made a post, but I dare say I don't anticipate that's going to happen. First and foremost, this is all meant for my own self as a sort of archival thing, but when I originally did this, I wrote completely in isolation. It was just for me. I would talk to people about it, but not a lot. In some cases, when I was writing in a cafe in the town I lived in at that time, which was Amityville, New York, on Long Island on the South Shore, I would write, and there was this yogi. He was he was coming across the street from the yoga center, I believe it was called, or it was a yoga ashram right across the street from the cafe, and he would come in and we would talk about the things that I was writing. He was very supportive at that time, and my friend Stacy Smith, who I meet regularly to talk about the Bhagavad Gita, at that time told me that it wasn't a coincidence that I was running into him when I was writing this. So it was certainly interesting, but he was one of the few people that I would talk to about the work. For the most part, I was just writing in kind of isolation, and now I'm doing the opposite. I'm publicly, I'm recording these and then posting them and blogging them, and sharing the experience of the commemoration. And of course, the book is published, Being and Learning, so you can always go back and look at the pages that I'm referring to, and I believe this is pages 96, 97, around there.